Just a couple of notes first. Thanks very much, Laura Lee. That was beautiful. And the reading was actually from Sarah. She knows my mind pretty well, so she picked it out. Scary thing. First of all, let me say I'm very humbled to have been asked to do this. I'm following some giants, and that's a tough act to follow. But I figure we can all learn from everybody, so I want to start this. It's about 1966, and Barre, Massachusetts. It's a town about a little more than half the size of Florence. A lot of farms up and down the road, and I'm walking down. It's nighttime with Laddie, our mascot. If you've seen Lassie, you get a pretty good picture. And I had actually forgotten that I got to spend that much time with a great dog while I was there. So as I said, it was night, and and I'm wearing a cassock collar and sash, which was pretty cool. I kind of missed that, actually. I felt pretty cool getting to wear that. Anyway, I sat down on a rock. It was a pretty clear night, and I remember looking up at the stars and the moon, and all of a sudden, I just had this incredible feeling that, you look through the wrong end of binoculars, and it's all reversed, and I still believed in a pretty localized God at the time, and God was way the hell up here, about several galaxies away, and I was down here, very far away and very unworthy, and it really did kind of a number on me all of a sudden, and so I started crying, and Laddie started whining, and I started crying louder, and Laddie started howling, and the louder I cried, the louder he howled, and nobody was experiencing that, probably. It was a farm road, so there weren't too many people around. But I was pretty shook up by the whole thing, didn't know what to make of it, so I went back to the novitiate where I was and saw that the Master of Novices light was on, so I knocked on his door, and so he called me in, and I tried to explain what had happened to me. Can everybody hear all right? Okay. I didn't know if he was going to, say I was certifiable or be ready to make me a saint or whatever. So he gets up and he goes to his bookcase and gets out this giant, and he's leafing through it, and I'm wondering what he's going to come up with. And he comes up with, page 957, here it is. This is what you experienced. And that was one of the last straws for the seminary, because I figured at that point that he had never had an experience like that, and he was trying to make something of it. What was actually the last straw was a couple of months after that. One of the priests had this brilliant idea. This was the ecumenical, the late 60s. There was a girls' school down the road, and why don't we have the girls up for coffee and donuts and a holy hour? And that was the real end. She was beautiful. She wrote poetry. I wrote terrible poetry, and so that was the end of that. But yes, I had wanted to be a priest since I was 4 years old, and my mom says after church I used to come home and I'd get up on a footstool and start preaching to them about whatever I heard the priest doing that day, which in those days was a lot of harangues for people not going to church, which is kind of funny. You think about the people who are actually there and they're, giving them a hard time for not coming to church. I think a lot of it was the priest got a lot of attention, and that was pretty cool. There were awesome vestments and chalices and all these kinds of things, and mostly drama. For any of you who were Catholics or anything similar to that, about the most dramatic thing in my life for a long time was the Easter Vigil. With all the darkness and lighting the fire and the organ and the bells and all of that kind of business. So I was in there for about 7 years in the seminary. As it turned out, there was one of my classmates was her uncle was a recruiter, so he started coming around, and it didn't take much to get me there. That was in Hyde Park, New York, is where it started. A couple of things I took away from that was, of course, that's where I got into music, because I was bored one year, and somebody said, why don't you take piano lessons? And so I took about 3 months of piano lessons. The organist left, and they said, guess what? You're the new organist. And that's where I learned I had a pretty good ear, and my piano teacher showed me how to make chords, and that was the last time I ever read any music. But I also came away with something that even though I got far, far away from religion or anything similar, was not only meditation, but just a habit of reflection. And so I thank them for that, because that's something that's stayed with me. I left in November of '67, the novitiate. I still remember it like it was yesterday. Unfortunately, this was November, so I missed the great summer of love. But I did spend the next 4 years in New York City, and that was a pretty incredible experience. It was a great time to be in New York. I spent almost all the money I had going to concerts, which were at that time for me were pretty religious experiences. And I started getting into playing rock and folk myself. Somewhere along that time, Sally's going to be mad at you. Somewhere after New York City, I moved back to Worcester, and I was living in a rooming house. I lived in a lot of rooming houses, and so one of the people who was living at the rooming house gave me this volume. It was called Seth Speaks, and it really did change my life forever. I'm still sort of following that as a philosophy, but the big thing was, I think of John Lennon and his period of don't believe in Beatles, don't believe in Jesus, don't believe, and you especially as a former Catholics would know, you throw all this stuff overboard, and then it's like, oh, now what? And so I was at my now what moment, and so it just really spoke to me, which is kind of weird, because ever since then I've been highly skeptical of people channeling. So go figure. But one of the two biggest things that really spoke to me, I think, was one, that he had a sense of humor, which I hadn't found much of in Catholicism. And the other one was a lack of dogma, which was also pretty awesome. Somewhere along that time also, a couple of people really impressed me, and these were every Sunday night when Cosmos was on. I was sitting there in front of the TV like it was my religious service, because Carl Sagan's sense of wonder about the universe was just awesome. Along about the same time, I ran into, not personally, but Joseph Campbell, Bill Moyers was doing 8 to 12 part series, and that was very enlightening to realize, oh, the Catholics didn't come up with this. How about that? Spent a long time in music, where I was doing mostly music, and I often tell people sort of jokingly that I would have wound up in the loony bin if I hadn't done that, but I really, really and truly believe that. It was great therapy, I could do all the screaming I wanted to, and figure what other job could you be wearing? Sequins and scarves and leather and chains in the same night. And I actually felt I was channeling a lot, so later on when I did some acting, I think it came pretty naturally, because I always felt when a songwriter writes a song, they're creating a character, and so I was playing the character. I wasn't me. I was inhabiting the character of the person who was written about. And one of the other big things, I had lived a pretty sheltered life, and then I go into the seminary. There were not just people that I hadn't met before, and this was, mostly during my music experience. There were kinds of people that I didn't even know existed in the world. So it was a great learning experience, and for most of the time when I was young and when I went into the seminary, I had this very weird thing that I wanted to be a saint, but I didn't like the idea of being human. So this was a great humbling experience, and guess what, Guy? You got to go through this first. After I'd lived in Worcester for a number of years, my girlfriend of 6 or 7 years left me, and Dad almost died, and it was one of those moments that, this is my life, I'd better get going on doing something. So I went back to school, and that's when I got into teaching, when I decided to get into teaching. And so the third chapter was going to Colorado and getting into that. It's kind of funny that I had, before I started teaching, I had this dream that really kind of has informed my whole teaching experience since. And in the dream, I was teaching this class, and I had everything very perfectly prepared. And at the end of class, all the students stood up and they booed, and they threw, balled up papers and threw them at me, and they were very displeased. So the next class, I decided to go in and just wing it. And everybody stood up and cheered after that, and that was pretty. I had this before I ever taught a class, so it was quite an incredible dream. Along the time in Colorado, I also met Dan, who was I've had a lot of therapy, and most of it was pretty much throwaway stuff. But this guy, Dan, was the most non-judgmental person I had ever met. And I've often told Sarah this, I would not be married today if it weren't for him. He was just a very incredible guy. And as a matter of fact, I remember in early days seeing him and talking about, even then I felt that Sarah and I were on a spiritual journey together. And it had a lot to do with our worldviews that were very similar. And I'm a pretty lucky guy in that sense. But Dan used to do a lot of guided visualizations with me. And he had this whole sort of ritual thing that he went into. And one of them especially was pretty incredible. I remember sitting there in the chair, and gradually, can't say it was like dying because I don't know what that's like, but gradually sort of everything that I experienced as a living being was just sort of falling away from me until finally I got to this place where I realized I existed, but I had no body. And that was a pretty amazing place to be. Unfortunately, I've never been able to duplicate it on my own, but just having had that experience even once was pretty incredible. As Ruth said in the intro, I don't like labels because they tend to fence you in. But if somebody asks me, I usually say something like pantheist. I've looked up a lot of definitions of pantheists. I've joined pantheist groups online. Usually I find several things that I don't agree with, so I guess as they say, you know, they have cafeteria Catholics. I'm a cafeteria pantheist. And there are two things that are mostly my pantheism. Everything is divine. It's infused with more energy than most of us can dream. We went up to Larry's house a few weeks ago, and they had these, I don't know, I think they call them salt candles or something like this. They look like rocks, and they have light inside, and that's how I think of the universe. Cars, dirt, chairs, rocks, everything has this light inside that infuses it and makes it alive. And everything is connected, and even a lot of scientists now are beginning to come to that realization, which is pretty cool. It would be nice at some point to see major science and spirituality come together. I want to finish with a couple of quotes from Seth, and I don't like to beat anybody about the head with this. It works for me. I come back again to a John Lennon quote, whatever gets you through the night. As far as belief goes, you have to die your own deaths, I have to die my own death, and I figure when it comes to that point, I'd better be pretty comfortable with what I believe. Somebody else's belief isn't going to help me through it. Nothing exists, neither rock, mineral, plant, animal, or air, that is not filled with consciousness of its own kind. So you stand amid a constant vital commotion, a gestalt of aware energy. He was pretty harsh on science as it has been. If you believe that your life has no meaning, then you will do anything to provide meaning, for your prime directive, so to speak, has been tampered with. I thought that was pretty well said. And finally, remember that a physical reality is an illusion. It is an illusion caused by an even greater reality. The illusion itself has a purpose and a meaning. Thanks for listening. That's all I got.